We are really excited to partner with the Future Minerals Forum as the Payne Institute for a variety of reasons. It's a timely conversation, a global conversation, and the attention that the area of mining and critical minerals for both energy transitions and defense applications has peaked over the last couple of years. And it's a very exciting time to be in this conversation, and we're honored to have the Payne Institute join other institutes like the Baker Institute at Rice in this exciting journey. So critical minerals as a topic has become top of priority for governments and industry around the world. Of course, mining has been a topic of conversation for world's governments and companies for thousands of years. But right now we're seeing a fundamental inflection point or change in the prioritization of thinking about these specific minerals that we term as critical because of several things that are happening in nonlinear ways. And by that I mean we're seeing a relatively radical change in energy systems globally. And as we realize that energy systems are changing towards cleaner energy technologies over a decadal period, it's become very clear that the minerals that make those solar panels, wind turbines, and certainly electric vehicle batteries and electric vehicles have become a constraint for various reasons. And that constraint manifests most recently in price. And so what we've seen for the first time in history maybe is, or at least modern history, is that the price of renewable energy technologies and batteries was on a steep decline over decades. And for the first time in those decades, within the last year, those prices have started to bump back up. And that has put a shock in the system. And the reason for those price increases in these key technologies is largely because of minerals and the mineral inputs. And so that has put it on the priority list of policymakers and advocates and companies globally. It's not the only constraint for these complex energy transitions, but it's become a core one. And so that's why we're paying attention to it and why the Future Minerals Forum is so timely. Often the discussion of critical minerals is made as homogeneous, as if they're one thing. And we do that because it's easier to conceive of some large homogeneous critical minerals aspect. But in practice, what they are is a group of 20, 30, 40 minerals that all have very different supply chains, stakeholders, pricing, markets, governance. And so it's very difficult to bring them together. And if we do just bring them together sort of to simplify decision making, what happens is that those decisions are myopic or they're suboptimal. And so when we're thinking about them, we do have to think about the specific minerals across that chain. And when we come back to the beginning of the chain, which is mining, we have a lot of issues with mining over the last, it's not a recent issue. So mining has been the bane of certain communities or environmental organizations, not for 10 years or 20 years, but for thousands of years. And we're at this really interesting point now where the mining industry finds themselves as a key player in ensuring clean energy technologies and therefore addressing climate change. So the narrative has fundamentally shifted. But just because that narrative of mining being fundamental to climate change has shifted, it does not mean that that shift takes place in the same time frame as communities or stakeholders or environmental organizations say. And so we have a lot of work to do, yes, on sustainable mining and the technologies that exist and their implementation, but even more so on things like permitting reform and what's called social license to operate, the ability for communities to sort of allow these things to happen. And so the focus on mining globally is very different country to country, of course, and they have different resources country to country. But we're in an important time to have those conversations again with a different perspective on the positive aspects mining can bring to society as opposed to what historically has been the negative aspects. When we think of critical minerals and the dramatic increase in demand for certain critical minerals for clean energy, say, or defense, we often come to the question of, do these things exist in sufficient quantities? And the answer is yes. There is no physical constraint, even in the long term, on the actual minerals. The Earth's crust and the sea hold so much lithium that we essentially could never reach the resource end of that. But that is not exactly how the price signals or investment signals come to mining companies and mining projects. So how that happens is through markets. And those markets are fairly nascent, small, and are not giving good price discovery. So you have to bring it down from what's called the physical resource potential of a mineral, which, as I said, is largely not going to be exhausted, to its economic potential. And that's a very different set of equations and investment decisions. And we're now seeing that it's not quite so clear. Yes, there's lots of lithium on planet Earth, as an example, but the price of lithium has gone up hundreds of percentages over the last year. So it doesn't reflect the fundamental resource availability. What it's reflecting is markets and investment and the ability to get these projects done. So right now, what we're seeing is very high and volatile prices across commodities in the world. And this happened actually before Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So we were seeing very high prices in, say, natural gas in Europe prior to the invasion. And we were seeing high prices in commodities like steel and copper prior to that invasion. But since the invasion, we've seen fairly dramatic price increases in critical minerals, say for electric vehicle batteries especially, like lithium, like cobalt and nickel, and even graphite to an extent. And so how do we contemplate growing these markets with such high demand for them at a time with very high prices? And so that has really brought a lot of attention to these markets. And what we see in these actual markets is that they're not nearly as liquid, as large, as sophisticated, as easy to price as what we're used to, say, in an oil market. So today, if I or my son wants to tell me the price of oil, he can look it up on his phone in 2 seconds and tell me the price of oil in Dubai, in Europe, in the United States very easily and with pretty high confidence. That is not the case with almost any of these critical minerals. So they're being priced in different currencies. They're being priced on markets that are not transparent. They're being priced on markets that often have poor governance. The price aspect has become the real focus of a lot of efforts globally and needs to be the focus even more so. So as an example, last year or earlier this year, the London Metals Exchange stopped trading nickel for a period of a couple weeks. The initial diagnosis was, well, Russia's something like the third largest exporter of this nickel, and the war caused this. It turns out that was part of it, but the larger case had to do with short selling and basically the fundamental thinness or non-liquidity of the nickel market. Now, if we can crash the nickel market, that has rather dire consequences for long-term provision of these critical minerals at reasonable prices. And if we don't have reasonable prices, then the entire narrative of this critical mineral supporting this dramatically growing clean energy technology and electric vehicle market segment starts to fall down. And so it becomes a rather high priority to get right. We are looking at a sort of fundamental problem in the pricing of critical minerals right now. We have a dramatically increasing demand, especially from electric vehicle batteries, for a specific set of critical minerals. We have markets that are not sophisticated, they're not established to give good price discovery. And we have issues on incentivizing supply coming online at reasonable timeframes for mining. So the mining aspect can take a decade to get a mine up and running. And that's only can it happen with the right conditions for social license to operate, with permitting reform, and with good price discovery, which they're not getting. And then if you move across the supply chain to the processing of these minerals and metals, while it doesn't take quite as long to build a processing or refining facility, the permitting and social license can be even more difficult, because they can be, with many of these minerals and metals, environmentally difficult. The critical mineral space is largely dominated by one country, and that is China. They made a decision, a strategic decision on policy, on regulation, on investment decades ago, that this was going to be an important area for their economic development and for the global market, and they were right. And so the issue for many other countries these days can be political. So in the United States, the economic battle between the United States and China that is very clear in, say, the manufacturing of chips, is now drawn its attention to critical minerals. In Europe, there are issues of possible security of supply or security of trade, and also some geopolitics. And that, while the relationship between China and other countries is very different around the world, they have to be central to any solutions and discussion, whether it's political or scientific or content-wise, in the critical mineral space. And one of the most far-reaching decisions they made was not actually on the mining aspect, but on the advanced manufacturing aspect. And so when you think of advanced manufacturing of technologies, in this case like electric vehicles, it does a lot more for your economy in terms of value add to have manufacturing of advanced manufacturing than it does to mine rocks. And so they knew that and started with advanced manufacturing at the same time as understanding the full critical mineral supply chain. And so we have a lot to learn from how they went about to, in the US parlance, dominate this space. And I think they've become a very important part of the conversation and how to partner, how to invest, and how to think about this area. Markets in the Middle East, in North Africa, and Sub-Saharan Africa, and in parts of Asia are very diverse. And so, again, with this question of critical minerals, we need to break it down from a homogeneous entity into the actual minerals. And so there are some really important markets across the region of the Gulf, the Middle East, North Africa, Sub-Saharan Africa, and parts of Asia. And those include things like the production of nickel from Indonesia, which is a massive player in that area. We have graphite, graphite, which is essential for the anodes of batteries, mostly coming from Mozambique. And then we have the story that's mostly told about cobalt and some of the issues in the Democratic Republic of the Congo. So the region is fundamentally important on the supply side, becoming more important on some of the processing side, and hopefully through partnership and through engagement, through trade, can become an important player on the advanced manufacturing side. So what happens when you incentivize the full supply chain, it becomes more efficient, more optimal, but also you can bring in more recycling. So something I haven't spoken about too much recently is the recycling aspect. And what we see with recycling is it almost always happens next to advanced manufacturing. So unless you have the production of, say, batteries or cars, you're much less likely to incentivize recycling. And that becomes an added benefit to going down the road of thinking through these things in terms of supply chain. And I think in the region that we're concerned with around the Future Minerals Forum, which includes the continent of Africa, which includes the Middle East and parts of Asia, we want to think through critical minerals space to be beneficial economically for the countries of the region and for the people of the region, while recognize the issues of social license and environmental degradation. And so we want to learn from past mistakes and help grow the region into a powerhouse across the supply chain so that the people and the governments benefit economically as well as from a societal perspective. So we have a fundamental change in the demand for critical minerals globally, primarily because of the rapid growth and deployment of clean energy technologies, and that shows no sign of slowing. So if we look at the market from the demand perspective, it looks very healthy. And then we bring that back to the critical minerals and metals that we need to ensure that the pace and scale of that energy transition is not hindered. And on the mining side, there have been significant advancements in the technologies towards sustainability, towards better use of water, towards more responsible post-mining activity, towards how we think about tailings piles and safety. So across health, safety, governance, and environment, the technologies on the mining side are largely there. They exist. What we haven't seen at large scale globally is their application in all mining activities. And so, of course, we have mines that are quite old and that suffer from either poor technology use or their relationship with the environment or their relationship with communities. That is changing and changing rapidly because of this new attention on critical minerals and therefore mining. And so now that the spotlight has really been shown on the industry, they've been making really important efforts to move towards sustainable mining with the associated technologies that come with it. Of course, it's not just a technology issue, it's a whole systems design issue, and engaging with communities around it becomes absolutely fundamental. Now, those communities have a long history of not thinking very highly of the mining industry. And so that paradigm will change. It's changing from a technology perspective, it's changing from an ESG perspective, but those changes don't happen overnight. And what we're going to have to balance somehow is the speed to which we can get mining underway for these critical minerals with the acknowledgement that it has to be done right. The technology constraint and the technology development can help a great deal. But if we think of these things solely as technology systems and not systems that are fundamentally technology and society, then we can miss a great deal and do things, even if the technologies are great, we can do things in the wrong way. There's a suite of policies, regulations, investments, and other actions that governments globally are taking to try to ensure robust, resilient, secure supply chains of critical minerals towards the end goal of addressing climate change, but also economic development. And so that portfolio of approaches spans policy and investment and is being done very differently, as one might imagine, in different countries and different regions of the world. So what we're seeing is some combination of research and development. So that's fundamental research and development, not just for mining, but for processing, and also looking at substitutability and advanced technologies, how we can use more of some minerals and less of others, et cetera, and recycling. So the R&D is fundamental to this and is still needed across the supply chain. We're seeing new kinds of investment vehicles that include loan guarantees and trying to affect the cost of capital. So what we have, the cost of capital, not just for the technologies, but for the fundamental infrastructure, is significantly higher in developing economies than it is in OECD economies. That goes to the very bottom line and is a fundamental constraint on development of these things. So we have to look at investment vehicles and financial tools that directly address cost of capital, especially in developing economies. There are a lot more new diplomatic channels opening now. So that is clubs of countries or groups of countries that are like-minded or that have trade agreements in place or development agreements in place that are working together. So the United States has several of these, and of course China has for some time been pushing these financial tools and investments out through its Belt and Road Initiative, and that's impacted countries across the world. And then we have policies that are mostly domestic policies that can be put in place as pull or push policies. But in the United States, we often use tax credits as a mechanism. That doesn't always work in other economies that don't have such complex tax systems as we do. But there are policies that we can think of from other areas, say from the energy sector, that can work for drawing out and being carrots for supporting critical minerals supply chain development. One of the difficulties is we really have to think in terms of supply chains. If we think only of one part of this equation, whether it's the beginning or the end, then we will inevitably come across more bumpy roads on the journey. The Future Minerals Forum is an ideal time and place to bring together the world's thought leaders and governments on the issues of critical minerals. Essential for addressing the various bottlenecks that will arise, the various price volatility issues, the various governance issues, environmental issues, is going to be maintaining this issue as a priority. That sounds rather simple, but in almost any area of public policy or investment, a focus needs two things. It needs attention or prioritization, and it needs associated investment or funding, public or private, and both in almost all cases. And so I think that the ministers and the decision makers of the Future Minerals Forum really need to focus on how they can expand the window of attention on critical minerals and maintain its priority, at least in the short term, so that we can direct the investment, direct the policies towards creating a robust, resilient, environmentally friendly, and sustainable set of supply chain for critical minerals.